looks like you caught your first fish.
I got my first fish.
Caught it on a
behind me.
back cast.
Oh, you didn't see it? I'm like, what's up? I can't get it to go forward.
So when I do a single hand cast here, watch how I pull in very tight and then I flare out and then up. That's how you really keep the rod loaded well. Notice how the line is tight to the rod the whole cast. So the Spey cast is kind of the same thing. I go tight and I kind of flare as I pass. 12 o'clock is here. Here's 3 o'clock. As I pass 3 o'clock, I flare out to 4:30. See how I do that? I come here, I flare out. That keeps me in a straight line. You see how that D-loop's lined right up with where I'm casting? And it's not a lot of movement. Look how little my hands are moving. Very little movement. Now, so we talked about lining up, that's lining up horizontally. Lining up vertically, again, is just keeping the rod tracking level. That's what you want to focus on. If I come back and my bottom hand goes like that, I drop my rod tip, my D-loop goes into the water. If I go back and I go like this, my D-loop goes up into the air, my forward cast is going to go down. If you see your forward cast doing that, either you're stroking on an upward angle and then pushing down, or you're stroking back level, but you're leaving your bottom hand back too far like this, and it's bringing the rod tip up and you're pushing down like that. So that would look something like this. See that? A good firing position, this hand will come out here more to go forward. And that's what we worked on, Shya, today that really helped you, was getting that hand out in front a little bit.
Right.
Notice I don't do much. I'm flat until I finish my back cast, then I lift up to cast. I always lift up to make a forward cast. Same thing with a single-handed cast. I stay level, I lift up to make my forward cast. So that's kind of how the rod works. Any questions on any of that, or?
Why are they two different colors?
This is a running line, and that's a head.
Okay.
And I've actually welded the two together. Typically these are connected with a loop, and most of my rods I wouldn't change that. I would leave the loop system. This particular rod's a very small, light rod. I'm going to do mostly, it's not a system that I'm going to really change my head out on. I know that I'm going to stick with this line for this rod, let's say.
Yep.
So I kind of just got rid of the loops.
Yep.
And trout fishing use a lot of light tippet, so it's one less thing to get that light tippet to snap.
Yes.
But you know, you don't have to do it. You can do it. You know, you can buy a line that's solid. There's not a lot of good lines out there that I like that are solid. This particular line works really well. And this is an Airflow Scandi Compact. I just find that they're a very good casting line. Scandi being Scandinavian, Compact being just a little bit shorter than a normal, what they used to be. You know, the typical Scandis are usually about 35 to 40 feet long. These heads are about 30 feet long, 28 to 31 feet long.
What kind of distance?
They're really good for switch rods. What's that?
What kind of distance is this good for?
How far can you cast? Pretty far. You'd be pretty surprised. This is a very small switch rod. I mean, a bigger switch rod will cast even further. But you'd be surprised. You can get pretty good distance even with a small rod like this. And that's with no back cast. I mean, and that's no false casting. I mean, just picture the amount of time that your fly is going to spend in the water. You can still throw your reach casts.
That's very cool.
You know, you just can't do that with a single-handed rod, really. You know, I mean, you can Spey cast, but you're not going to achieve that kind of distance. You see this?
I love the one for your drift too.
Right. This is a 5-weight rod, very small, very light. It's 10 foot, but I'm casting a 270 grain line, so it's equivalent to like a 7 or 8 weight line in terms of weight. But because it's a Scandi and that tip tapers down fairly fine, I'm still not spooking fish like you would think because the line's so heavy. You know what I mean? So that's what's nice about it. You got the energy of a 7 or 8 weight, but you've got the delicacy of like a 5 or 6 weight. You know what I mean?
If you're using a sinking line, how many grain sinking line would you use on a 7/8 rod?
On a switch rod?
Yeah.
I mean, most of the time with a switch rod, I'm not using a full sinking line. I mean, you certainly can, but I think you can cover most fishing situations by just changing your tip out. So all I would do is I would just take this is looped, this poly leader is looped on here. I would just
so
switch
that's a
this
10
out.
Foot, so,
I would switch out for a 10-foot sinker.
okay.
And they come in all different sink rates.
Right, so like I have for my Spey rod, I have...
Exactly.
Yeah. But, so these are in 10 foot. And for the Spey rod, I'm using 14 feet.
Correct. They're just a little shorter for switch rods.
Okay.
You don't want a
You
long
toys.
tip for a switch rod.
He's like,
I
I
got
got
it.
those, I got those.
From last year. Like,
Extra super fun.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
You know, picture you got a fish rising by that tree. To be able to stand here, if I had trees behind me, and still essentially reach.
What do you comes in now? It's tricky on you.
And that's very awesome.
I can feed some line into that drift. Look at that.
Yes, that's very awesome, man.
And I could do that if I had trees 10 feet behind me. I could do that. You could never even consider casting that far with a single-handed rod with trees behind you. Wouldn't even come close.
Right.
and you always bring
You know,
it
it
in
takes
right
some practice and stuff, but
through. You usually just bring it in right to where the head changes color or
Yeah.
a little further in.
yeah, if I leave this head here, it's going to be very awkward for me to try and cast it. It's just that running line is just too thin to have control of the head. Now, if I bring that head way in, like 4 or 5 feet, that's fine if I'm not shooting line. You know, like if I'm just casting at that distance, then that's fine. I can fish that distance.
Okay.
But I'm not going to be able to shoot line. So basically what happens is, if I'm casting longer than the head, then I have the head at the tip of the rod to actually make the cast. But if I go to recast, then I strip back to the head again. You know what I mean? If I'm casting shorter than the head, well, I don't need to shoot line. You know what I mean? Because I'm casting shorter than the head. So if I have a fish that's, 10, 20 feet away from me, I'll just work this amount of line and just do little mini Spey casts in tight quarters. And I can do that with one hand. I can do it with one hand. I can do it with two. Whatever works for me, Whatever I feel like doing.
Now with the Spey rod, are you always casting downstream
No.
the quarter, or can you?
There's
you
all
saw
kinds of
fish-
stuff you can do.
Right.
Do stuff like that. If I want to nymph fish through a run, I can do that. I can high stick
Right.
very comfortably. The longer rods, you have a little bit more line control. I like having a little butt on there too, because it keeps the reel out away from you, which is cool. So I can high stick through, no fish. Back out, drift my nymphs through, lead them through. However, I don't have the best water for doing it, and I don't have a nymph on. But you can see how effective, and casting split shot's a lot easier with these rods. The line's heavier. It drives split shot better.
So you'd use a floating line with a leader and a split shot on there, or you go to a single?
I would use this head
Right.
I would probably go to a mono leader if I was going to nymph fish rather
Right.
than the poly.
Right.
But you could use the poly. What you could do is use the poly, put a strike indicator right at the end of the poly,
Right.
and then run tippet off the poly to your double nymph rig and your split shot or however you rig it.
And a
You guys
mono
might-
leader would be just a regular mono leader, correct?
Yeah. The only thing with a mono leader, and it'll work,
Right.
especially for any relatively enclosed fishing. I mean, you could easily still use it out to 50 feet or better. But poly leaders stick to the water a little better because they have a little bit of weight and they're not smooth like a mono leader. Because a mono leader is very smooth, it's hard mono, it kind of slips a little bit more than a poly. Polys tend to grip
load the rod.
and anchor a little bit better. What's that?
It'd be harder to load your rod.
A little bit. I mean, it wouldn't anchor as good as a poly does, but you could still very easily fish. You'd have no problem with a mono leader doing what I'm doing right now, for the most part. The really long stuff to that tree type of thing is where the poly really helps, But the nice thing about the poly too is they really turn over well because they've got weight to them. You know what I mean? You can see the drifts of my fly starting to sink, but you can see the drifts you can make. Now, if your fly is sinking and you're Spey casting, You know, a good thing to do if you're going to do a lot of spey, like not false casting and dry fly fishing, is get a really good fly floating and pre-treat your flies. One of the ones that you pre-treat that makes them float like a cork.
Like watershed?
Like a watershed or something like that, you know. And again, you can always, as long as you have room, you can always false cast and dry the fly, you know. And you can even let it hit, and then, you know, now my fly will be floating. But you can see the water you can cover.
That's a great trip.
And how cool it is, you know, to be able to do.
How about,
Think about
how about fishing a dropper?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, dry dropper or whatever, you know,
Dry
a double
dropper.
nymph rig or a dropper, or, you know, dry dropper with a switch rod is a great way to fish. You know, picture coming down a pool and just put the dry dropper out, make your drift. You know, you're walking, covering some water, watching your fly, no taker. You know, strip back into your head. You know, make your drift and just work your way, and you could have a brushy bank behind you and not have to worry about it. You know, not constantly thinking, oh my God, how am I going to make my next cast without getting stuck in a tree? You're going to lose a lot less flies too, you know? Because your fly, if you notice, I mean, when I'm casting here, my fly is always out in the water. Fish rise. That's called a spiral roll. That's actually a spiral single. But we take the line from, let's say, here, cast it this way.
Right.
It's called a spiral roll.
Is that like a snake roll?
Like
Same
a snake
thing?
roll, same thing. But they're very effective tools, and they're a lot of fun. Streamer fishing, there's no better way than a switch rod. Absolutely no better way. Because again, you're using a much heavier line, but still using a light rod. So you can enjoy the fish, but really cover a ton of water with a big fly. I mean, think about how much work you put in. I don't know if you guys have fished like a big river like the Delaware with a streamer. And the amount of work to go through with a heavy sink tip and a 5-weight or 6-weight rod, you know, trying to double haul and false cast and change direction.